So I wanted to get this started with kind of an introduction of everybody going through their elevator pitch. So everybody give me your 30-second, 1-minute pitch on your company, and then we can all understand who you are. So you get to go first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Deloney. I am the founder and head designer of the Chelsea Deloney collection. And I'm going to actually read the one I created in the Oregon TIE Excel Bootcamp class. So that one was my favorite. So the Chelsea Deloney collection is an affordable luxury jewelry company featuring one-of-a-kind, lightweight statement pieces in silver and 24-karat gold that are hypoallergenic, weigh less than an ounce, and are uniquely Afrocentric and modern.
So I'm Anna Schaud, and I am the founder and CEO of Garden Bar, and we are a chain of fast casual restaurants that specializes in salads only. We have currently 9 locations in Oregon, or in Portland, going to 10 locations around town.
Can everyone hear me? Am I turned on? Okay.
Take 2.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Sperry. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Minnow. We're developing the first internet-connected food delivery and pickup kiosk. You can essentially think of it like an Amazon locker for food. Our kiosks provide a more convenient pickup experience for busy consumers while also lowering costs for restaurants and delivery companies.
She's got mine.
I'll get that back to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Paula Hayes. I am the founder, CEO, and chief chemist of Hue Noir. We are a beauty company that leverages science, technology, and innovation to build multicultural-based makeup products for women of color. Specifically, they are the most underserved part of the beauty industry and the fastest growing segment of the beauty industry.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lily Yo, co-founder and CEO of Gomi Kids. We like to think of ourselves as being in the business of making small and mighty baby essentials, ranging from baby mittens all the way to baby apparel that help make mom, baby, and frankly also our rescue human trafficking victims that we help stay rescued, stay mighty.
Hi, I'm Gabe Paez, founder and CEO of The Wild. We have an experiential collaboration platform for designers to create and share their experiences using augmented and virtual reality. It's cloud-based and allows design teams to come together across distance into their creations and ideas, whether they want to work in virtual space or connected into the physical space where their design will result.
Awesome, thanks guys. So I asked you to do that for 2 reasons. 1, just to introduce yourselves to everybody, but 2, I hear a lot of pitches from entrepreneurs in my role at the Business Journal, and a lot of them are not good. And so I think it's something that gets overlooked by entrepreneurs in terms of practicing and honing a pitch, whether it's for an investor, for sales, for media, that sort of stuff. So I'm wondering, how long did it take all of you to hone that pitch that you just gave, and sort of how did you come to it? Like, what kind of advice did you follow? Like, how did you craft it?
Sure.
So for anybody who wants to answer.
Yeah, so for mine, I just want to say and just reiterate how valuable the boot camp was. So that was like an assignment in class. So we actually had a deadline. I'm not sure how long it took, but we had to do it like really, really fast. So it took me about, I think about 30 minutes to actually come up with it.
Well, I think the pitch is always a work in progress, really. Every time you do one and you go next time, like, well, I should do it better. I think the most important thing is figuring out what your message is going to be. You have a limited amount of time. They're going to cut you off after that 10 minutes, and you need to be able to deliver that precise message in that amount of time. So it's distilling the message before you craft the pitch. I think that's important. And also knowing your audience is very important too, because if you're talking to a group of tech investors, it's much different than a group of people who focus on environmental and impact. I think that is very different, the way you deliver the message. The message is the same, it's just the way you deliver and how you emphasize the message. That's how I do it. I vary it.
Yeah, I was going to just pretty much say the same thing. I think it's taken a bit of work in progress and experience and feedback, and ultimately you get stronger in your messaging. You start to understand the points that are most important to get across to the audience. And when you're in those tight deadlines, or if you're on an elevator and you only have a little bit of time, what's the most important thing you want people to know? And so you start to hone that in.
For me, it's been kind of an evolution where in the beginning, when you feel like you understand your idea, but you don't, it turns out you actually don't really understand your own ideas when they're very loose in the beginning. And so first just getting to the place where you say it enough and speak it enough. And this, I feel like, works differently for different entrepreneurs, whether they think out loud or think with writing it out or just internally being thoughtful about their business. You have to do whatever's going to work for you to sort of flesh out that idea so that you truly understand it. And then really, I totally agree, it's about knowing the audience and speaking to that audience so that they can really understand it in their terms, because I'm one elevator pitch for all occasions is sort of insane, really.
No. And so I've got a few questions, but then also I'll open it up to questions from the audience if anybody has anything they want to ask the panel, so start thinking. So you guys are all in different industries. You got food, packaged goods, apparel, tech. And I'm wondering, when you made this decision to go and follow this great idea that you have, what was your first step? I mean, was it finding a banker? Was it meeting with a lawyer? Was it taking a business class? Kind of what was your first step to get to where you are for anybody who wants to go?
I'll take a stab at it. Sure. Well, I would say don't meet with a lawyer unless you're making a product for lawyers. Very good. Not that I have anything against lawyers, but so my first step was to go talk to a customer. And the reason I did that was because I did the opposite when I started my first company, which was what a lot of entrepreneurs do. You spend a lot of time building a product that you think is going to solve a customer's problem. You take it to market and you realize, actually, they don't need this product. They don't want it. It doesn't solve their problem. I think Steve Blank, who's the sort of inspiration behind the Lean Startup, put it best when he said that business plans rarely survive first contact with customers. I actually prefer Mike Tyson's way of putting it, which is that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So go out and talk to customers. My first customer that I spoke to was a restaurant owner. She owned a food business. She liked the idea so much that she became one of my co-founders. So that was an indication that I was onto something significant.
I would totally concur with that, with Steve. It's for us, it was different, right? So with baby products, like we are our customers. And so, but like, what if we're not reflective of all of the mommies in the United States, or let alone the world? We better find people, other mommies that look different than us. And we found a representative set. So we not only did a deep dive on ourselves, but we did a deep dive on like really a good representative set of our end consumers, and also with our B2B retailers. It's like all throughout the process, we tried to strip out the risk as much as possible by having conversations with them incessantly, like, is this colorway, or is this print, is this packaging, is this price point, so that it just became an afterthought by the time it came onto market, that it was really vetted thoroughly.
All right. Did anybody, I know you said you did the boot camp, did anybody else do any sort of like organized like classes or like incubator, accelerator sort of thing?
I wouldn't say I did organize classes, but I'm a scientist at heart, so I did a lot of research. I'm married to a lawyer, and I had my MBA before I started. I wrote a business plan, but like everyone says, your business plan changes the minute you start your business. So it was really about understanding my consumer and how I wanted to reach them. And I wanted to approach my business very differently than most typical cosmetic or makeup brands, in that I wanted to own the manufacturing. I needed to figure out if that was feasible. So I spent a lot of time talking to the people who make that equipment, that build out plants, to figure out, is this something that I could do? And then once I saw that there was a glimmer of hope and possibility, then it was revising the plan and figuring out how to get to market.
Why did you want to control that piece of it?
Because for two reasons. In the cosmetic space, there are really only one or two R&D houses in the entire country who know anything about developing shades that are more inclusive. On the color cosmetic side, it's actually really more complex chemistry. I happen to know that kind of chemistry. But then to get a contract manufacturer to make my custom products with enough shade range for me to be a full-service company, it was too daunting, the idea of having someone take all of my lipsticks, 11 different shades, and I'd have to buy 20,000 of all of them. Now multiply that across the entire brand, it's not a feasible start.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add?
Yeah, so I actually started 6 years ago with my business. And the first thing that I did, well, first of all, I'm the daughter of a designer who also does jewelry. And one thing I did was I actually started testing products among my friends to see if there was any interest, because I didn't want to invest my time and my ideas into something that, one, the market was flooded with, and two, that people weren't interested in. So I spent a while doing that and testing the products. Like, I agree, you have to go to your consumer first and you have to get feedback, or else your business isn't really going to go anywhere, if you're in the business of selling things anyway.
I did, in my previous company to this, did do an accelerator Oregon storyboard when it was around. And that was really, it turns out, sort of an essential step in this company, an evolutionary step, because it really did two things. Number one, it got me connected to the community, meaning, you know, like the people that everybody knows, for starters, like Rick and others, but also even some people in the investment community. And it made me really understand that I was on the wrong path with that previous company. And so I diverted, shut that down, and basically started The Wild. And so sometimes I think just tapping into a community is the essential first step to getting your idea off the ground and rolling forward.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, mine was a little different. I wanted to see if this existed before, but I made a mistake, and I went to a startup conference, and it was a tech startup conference, and I went to pitch a restaurant, and it was really weird because I was trying to take the temperature of the acceptance of the concept, and everybody was looking like, "What are you doing here?" So it was a flop when I went, and then nobody understood what I was doing. So I thought, okay, well, I gotta try something different. And what I did was to try to find out who was already doing what I was doing, and what would bring that would be a little different. And that's when it starts to hone in the idea of what we're going to bring to market. But again, know your audience. I clearly didn't at the time.
It's a good message. And so how have each of you handled funding your endeavors? Did you seek bank funding? Was it investors? How have you done it so far?
I'll talk about it. I'll do it. Okay, I'll start. Well, you know, with restaurants, again, nobody wants to fund a restaurant. Just if you're going a restaurant business, just know this right off the bat. So I had to self-fund the first one. Second one was families and fun. You know, I've done the whole gamut. Then it's friends and family. Then it's angels. So you just go through a progression of what the different steps of funding, but that's how I did mine. But I also did a little banking, but banking is not as easy either, so.
Sure. This is my fourth startup, so I was fortunate to be able to fund it initially on my own. But with my first startup, we did something that a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, overlook and shouldn't, which is that we turned to customers for the funding. And I actually was able to raise $500,000 from a group of 20 customers before I had built anything. And it was non-equity, so it's non-dilutive funding. Essentially, it's a down payment on a future purchase of a product that hasn't been built yet. And I think you can do that if the problem that you're solving is serious enough. And so that had two important benefits for us. One was it provided us with capital quickly, relatively quickly, and very inexpensive capital. But it also signaled to investors, because subsequent to that, we raised a significant amount of venture capital, that we were solving an important problem. Because customers are not going to give you $500,000 to solve a problem unless it's a serious problem that nobody else is currently solving. So I think the lesson out of that is you want to try to be creative with your funding options. Don't just sort of look at the traditional, you know, let's go to the bank, let's talk to angels. There are other ways to get money if you're creative about it.
I would agree with that. I mean, I'm probably the most odd way to get funded. You know, again, we're a baby company, and we started this thing because we were moms, and the products that we were using weren't working. So of course, we're from Portland, we're gonna make it and bring it to market. That's what we do. And so, you know, we cobbled our little savings, and like, we'll make the first prototype. And it was just this organic little amoeba that kept growing. And, you know, we lasted a whole year in our little R&D money, and then the first purchase from, after we figured out what pricing was, we can't make it in the US because no one would buy a $25 baby mitten. Okay, I gotta go to China. Well, I'm gonna have to buy 8,000 pairs. Well, there goes the wad, and so we're like, let's hope this works, and we're gonna go to D2C. And we sold 20 pairs, I think, the first day, and we're like, okay, that's not gonna work because we have no more marketing money. And we literally went B2B and put the stuff in our car like Phil Knight did, and he went to every store and tried to sell it out of the back seat. We literally went to 20 baby boutiques and got our first accounts. We're like, B2B it is. And we literally started, and they told us which trade shows, so everything would just get refunded back into the business. We didn't even know there was access to funding until like year 6. And meanwhile, we had just grown on our own. But I would say my little secret, and I guess you could call it banks, but there's this little thing called access checks for those of you who've protected your credit all these years, in your adult life, that, they would come in the mail, and literally when we had surges where we needed to buy more inventory at a cost of 3% or what have you for 18 months of 0% interest, and then, the 3% cost to borrow, it was a really good way to kind of fund these small surges. So very few people talk about that, but we sustained on that for a while until we actually took funding when we proved our concept out to market.
For me, it was a combination of bootstrapping for working day-to-day capital. But as I mentioned, I was building a facility, so that's where banks came in because I had actual assets. They were willing to loan against those assets. So it was really that combination, and that got us through to the point where I could really prove out the concept and to really expand the business. Then we moved on to family and friends and are now really in our first angel round.
Yeah, I started bootstrapping it out of my previous agency company that I had, where I was basically just rolling all of the profit from that company into funding this new company, and that was great. But really, it sort of took the conversion of. I knew that wasn't really sustainable doing that client work alongside the product because the client work always just pulled me away, and so we ended up. Raising an angel round from Oregon Angel Fund at the time through their seed squad. And that was a huge, long process, but it ended up paying off for us, and we were able to focus down on the product and on this company. And then we raised a seed round in March of this year to launch it.
So Paula, what was your experience going to a bank? Because I hear a lot of varied stories about that, and
it was really. I think I had, of course, bigger expectations, like everyone. I had really proved out that we were building the business, that we had the money set aside to handle quite a bit. And I walked in and said, "Yeah, so here's my business plan," and they were impressed by it. And I said, "All right, this is what I want. I'd like to have a loan for both the equipment and for the other part of the business." And I was happy to get the final approval, although it was a really slow process to get the funding for the assets. But assets without really working capital to actually make product, I find really interesting. So fortunately, I had money set aside, but I kept thinking, gosh, if I didn't have the ability to go out and buy the raw materials and the components, I'd be sitting here staring at shiny equipment that really wouldn't be doing anything. So I thought that was a really interesting dichotomy.
Okay. And so you all have mentioned going to angels and then even some venture capital. So I'm wondering, what was your approach to going to investors? How did you approach them? Did you have a strategy? Kind of how'd you do it?
I would invite them for lunch at the busiest time of Garden Bar. So we would go like, okay, I would prepare the team and say, okay, I'm bringing somebody in. No, but it's true, actually. I would do that. But a lot of times it's funny because sometimes investors find you too. Mm-hmm. When you're in a restaurant, they would see the concept, they would fall in love with it. And then you just start meeting somebody who gets interested in someone else that gets excited. But I'd say seeing the prototype in action makes a big difference. It creates they are able to see what we're trying to sell and what we're trying to create. So I did meet most of my investors at the restaurant, and we would discuss it and we'd talk about it. They would see what the vision was, and that's how I would approach most of them.
I would say two things. Number one, entrepreneurs are a valuable road into investors. Like, so because you can easily, you know, get meetings with most entrepreneurs who are happy to mentor you and just sit down for a coffee. Especially in this town, it's a very friendly town. And so, and they usually have those connections that you need when you don't have that access initially, rather than just, and that's so much more valuable than just sort of cold calling someone, or even just coming up to them at a party and being like, you know, giving them the cold pitch. The second thing I would say is like finding your champion. So once you are talking to investors, it's just crucial that, I mean, it doesn't even have to be the top level person, I would say, but you've got to find at least someone who you can connect with and that's going to believe in you and understand your concept enough that they're going to champion you and move it forward.
Definitely concur on the champion part. In our case, again, it's kind of a little unique. We didn't know how to seek funding per se, or didn't really come to that, you know, and realized far later on how many resources we actually have in Oregon to help entrepreneurs. And then once we got into the clue in on this whole community, it's like, okay, now we're in, we're going to everywhere. But in my case, it was, you know, a lovely little flyer in the mail from the fine folks at Beaverton who, you know, really wanted to support, you know, small businesses in Beaverton and really begin to create an infrastructure for that. So it was right around the time my co-founder had left, and you know, my husband was talking to me and checks the mail, and he says, hey dear, you can join a group of people and you don't have to be alone anymore. And literally, like, just throw your application in. And in that process, I found a team of, you know, we got accepted into this group of cohort of 5, and found our community.
Was that the OTBC?
The OTBC, and Nitin was part of that group, and you know, one thing led to another. Nitin was our champion and connected us also with Elevate and opened us up to a whole other set of resources. So I would concur this town is extremely helpful in that regard, but it takes that first courageous step to realize that, wow, there are actually a lot of resources out here to help.
And while there are a lot of resources, my story is a little bit more unique. So I didn't actually know how to seek funding out in the beginning either, but I didn't think that banks were an option for me. You know, I'm sure a lot of people know people of color have a history of just having some issues getting loans, so I never even thought it was a possibility. And later on, I got the education to prepare me to do that. Actually, through Elevate, I met the folks at MISO, Micro Enterprise Services of Oregon, and I entered into their African American Access to Capital program to build a portfolio that would make me competitive with other businesses. But before that, I didn't know. I was literally bootstrapping. Yeah. And even though we have a lot of resources in Portland for small businesses and Oregon in general, my population makes up 8% of the city and 2% of the state. And I think it's like 36,400 and something. Don't ask me why I know that number of black people here. My products, even though they're very versatile and anyone can wear them, they're made with my community in mind. And so the challenge for me was finding a champion who understood my vision and helped me embrace my vision too. Because I couldn't always embrace my vision in order to actually make money. But Siobhan actually was my champion during the boot camp, and she's the one, like, it's really true. If you just meet one person there, they're going to be that person to push your vision to the people that can really step in and help. And part of when I approached investors, we had a little pitch competition, but what I kept in mind was that I had to prove the impact that my business would have on retail, and the fact that black consumers control $1.2 trillion of the market, and that the Nielsen report says, you know, you have to sell to these people in order to actually make money. That really, I could see in Nitin's eyes. He was like, what? Are you serious? They control that much of the market, and proving that there was a need for it to people who couldn't identify with it was really important for me, because I wanted to take advantages of the wealth of resources we have here.
All right.
I would just concur with that. I mean, for me, not just African American women, but women of color in general spend anywhere from 5 times to 9 times more on beauty products, by the way. I knew that there was a need in the market, and so part of the whole idea of getting to the point where I could get angels interested was first networking. I never wanted to be the person to knock on the door and not have them know who's at the door. So I just spent a lot of time networking, getting to know people, getting involved, giving back when I could, and that made it much easier when it came time to start having those conversations.
Yeah, just in general, when it comes to fundraising from angel investors, I would just sort of suggest that you have a plan, be organized. So if you know, at the end of the day, raising money is sort of a numbers game. So for example, if you want to raise $1 million and your minimum is, say, $50,000, that means you need 20 investors. And if you assume that 9 out of every 10 investors you pitch are going to turn you down, that means you probably need to talk to 200 people to get your $1 million. And so you need a plan. You need to have an organized approach. You need to make the most of every meeting, because those meetings are like gold. You need to be prepared to make the most of that meeting. You need to network. So whenever you meet with an investor, you want to say, okay, who else should I talk to? Because all of these investors are connected with each other. They all run around the same circles. Always ask for a name or 2 names out of each meeting. Be sure to follow up. It's the sort of non-glamorous part of fundraising, but I think it's a critical element of fundraising success.
All right. I wanted to open it up if anybody in the audience has questions. Yeah, right here.
Yeah. Hi. My name is Ciro Gonzalez. I'm a Mexican MBA student. So, what would be your advice and your expectations from them?
Yeah. So, what do you expect from your investors?
I'm particularly interested in investors who are more than just the money, are willing to help, willing to assist, willing to lend their talents, and open doors in times and circumstances where I need a door open to get to that next level. I mean, I think that is incredibly invaluable, and I always think about that. Those that are willing to be advisors, because there are such talented people out there in the world, and most investors that I know have done great things in their own. And so if I can tap into them and their knowledge, then I know me and my business are positioned to do even greater things. So that's really important to me.
Anybody else?
So I would only add that you should do your due diligence on your investors. So investors who are interested in putting money into your business often sort of promote additional value add that they can bring to the table, whether it's deep operating expertise or network connections, things like that. But before you take their money, you should verify those claims. So talk to other CEOs that they've invested in, find out how active they are in the business, how helpful they've been. If they've been unhelpful, you want to know that. In what ways you should interact with these investors, what types of communication they prefer to have, how much information, all of those things. And I think if you do your homework, you'll end up with a team of investors that really can add that kind of value.
Can I say something? Just real quick. Yeah, all to that, but also understanding that first of all, they need to they need to agree with you on your long-term plan, because if you are for the long haul and they're waiting for an exit next year, it's going to be a disagreement there. So they need to understand your vision, support the vision, but also understand that startups need a level of adaptability, and things can flip, or you have to change course, and they need to understand. They need to understand how startups work. That's very important, because if they don't, they're not going to understand, but why did you change this? Why do we have to? Because that's what we have to do, because we're trying to adapt to the changes in the market. So their expertise investing in startups is key. If you have an investor who's never done a startup before, they're not going to understand what the needs are.
So I would say, for me, this question is interesting because it sort of applies to investors, but really to everyone, and more just the state of being as an entrepreneur. It's an interesting thing where I always had this romantic idea of like, oh, you're leading the ship and you're pushing forward and you're doing this and you're like, let's bring this investor in. That's not how it really works, or at least for me, not works effectively. Like, I see my role more as a sponge. Like, I surround myself with a lot of people that are not afraid to tell me I'm wrong, and that's a good thing, honestly. You still have to have a strong core to your sponge, and not lose your path because you have all these inputs coming in. But if you're not willing to listen, and especially with the investors, they have more experience than I do. They've seen companies fail, like a lot of companies fail, that make these, just ridiculous mistakes that you don't want to make. And so allowing yourself to be open and really listen to whether it's an investor or whether it's an intern that you're bringing in, honestly, like, there's value across that board, and I feel like that's just a critical skill you have to have.
All right. Any other questions? Thought I saw some right here.
Yeah, I feel like there's kind of this myth for us to be a little bit more.
So the question is, how did you come up with your great idea, and why did you think you needed to do it?
Totally. I'll start there. I just came upon this model recently, and I thought it was so helpful to understand. I mean, there's many different ways to frame this, but of the entrepreneurial journey. And in the beginning, they were talking about there's 5 different voices generally that can, over the evolution of a business that's needed to lead. And at that startup phase of a business, when it's just growth and idea, really, and you're working on an abstraction and trying to bring it to reality, how a pioneer and a creative are usually in tandem in that process. You could have a pioneer type as well as a creative type in one person, but usually they're a couple, which you see a lot of co-founders that way, built that way. There's usually the person who, the person who can see that future. They don't necessarily how to operationalize it. That's generally the creative, right? And then the pioneer is the one that's able to harness all these resources from God knows where, and to be able to put it all together and mobilize this thing to some kind of reality. I'm not, in our case, if my co-founder and I, creativity came in a different way. So she was the creative. She knew exactly what we needed, product-wise, and what was the missing gap in the market. I was able to operationalize that and pull all these pieces together in order to figure out how to make it happen. So, don't be discouraged if you're not the one with the light bulb idea, because it's like between what she had and how we actually, by the way, she had about 20 different options. To get to the one that we brought to market, it takes a lot of finessing and conversation and risk stripping and everything else to vet it, to get it to that market feasible option. And it takes many different voices to get there. So in our case, the aha was the product plus how to actually deliver it properly in the market that made it a viable option.
Anybody else want to take it?
Yeah, I do have to say something. I understand what you're saying about the light bulb idea, but I think the struggle sometimes is people might have the light bulb ideas and they think that they need to have the plan of implementation before they even take the first step. And that's where the analysis paralysis comes. I personally feel that that's a little bit, and I don't think that is a woman or a man. I think it's regardless of gender, men go through the same thing. Ask my ex-husband. I mean, 35,000 ideas, not one came to market. It was one of those things because I got the idea, but so it doesn't matter the gender. I just feel like it's one of those things, and I think that I had worked a lot with entrepreneurs before too, and it was what I did is I worked with creatives, and I told Stephen that, and creatives are like fearless. They have an idea, they're like, I just want to make this happen, and then nobody knows how to do it, but then somehow you figure it out, right? That was important because if you're not creative, which I'm not, then I feel that I thought I had to have the plan. Well, I had the idea and I had no plan. I just decided to do it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. First step, I'm going to register the name. Yay. And then you go, so you kind of take the step. It starts to unfold in front of you. So it's not so much of the idea, but knowing that you don't need to know the implementation plan at all. Just take that and run with it.
I'll say sometimes the big idea comes after you've started implementing things. And for me, I grew up in that culture. I grew up around jewelers. I grew up around metal workers. So all I knew was I wanted to do something in that field because that's what I was passionate about. But I can tell you, once you do get your idea or once you kind of know what you're looking for, be prepared to fight for it. And I think, and I do agree, it can be harder for women. So I'm going to acknowledge that. It can be different depending on gender. You got to be willing to do that. And I was put in a situation where I actually had to back up my idea and fight for it. And that's when my light bulb went off for me. I already had the designs, but my light bulb, like the purpose behind it went off when I finally had to come up with a plan, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. Your journey is your own, and the order that and the steps that you're going to take, it's going to depend on who you are.
Yeah, my journey was a little different. So I started my career as a product development chemist. So my job became taking other people's ideas and turning them into real products. And I worked really hard doing that. And I got to a point where I started to see things on store shelves. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. But how did that happen? So that's when I went back and got my MBA. But there came a point where I got tired of making other people's products, to be honest. The salespeople were doing really well. Everyone else in the business was doing really well. I was sweating coming up with not only the idea, but how to scale it up to market. And I was just the R&D chemist. My mom's an entrepreneur, so I guess I always had that bug. So there was always something in the back of my mind. But there came a day when I realized that for my business, I was living my problem every day as a woman of color, struggling to find the kind of products that I needed and wanted. And I found myself saying one day that you can keep complaining about the problem, or you can take what you know and do something about it. So I took that hat off and I put myself in that client seat, that client who would sit across from me when I was trying to turn their idea into a real product. And so I started to craft my business from that standpoint. And then as I flipped the switch to the product development chemist hat, I said, okay, so what would I do to solve that problem? And that's kind of how my business started to come.
All right. Any other questions out here? Oh, right there.
As an entrepreneur, I've been getting asked questions and put them together.
How did you build your teams? And this will be, I think, our
Very, very carefully.
Very
this will
carefully.
be our last question. So
Very carefully.
Gosh, that's an ever-evolving question as everything else, because your team will change too.
Yeah.
You know, and what I'm learning now at 8 years into the business is like, you know, even you know, as a pioneer, and like when your company crests into another era, you know, of stabilization, you might need different voices and to lead versus who's leading now. And that might implicate the current founder and CEO even, right? So, I think I would start with, especially because you're the sole founder, know who you are, know what you're good at, and then know what your gap is immediately. And usually if you are the creative, I would find that pioneer, hurry, you know, and somebody who knows how to galvanize resources really easily and a generalist and is capable of wearing multiple hats and high tolerance of ambiguity. You know, when you're building that early team, I can't tell you how often, like my whole team, like wore probably 6 different hats, at least, a minimum, maybe 10 on a given day. And so they just have to be very deft at being able to switch and not get, you know, swirled up by any of that. And the amazing team right over there, you know, who's doing that for us every single day. It can get overwhelming otherwise really easily. And knowing which one, you know, what your strengths are for each of the teams so that you're complementary and not overlapping in those arenas. Be a general question.
Yeah, so I have a perspective on this. I spent a couple years as an entrepreneur in residence for a startup accelerator, so I got to work with a lot of entrepreneurs like you who had great ideas and had been working on them for some time, but were unsure of how to sort of take that next step. And you know, the key thing is to find co-founders who are as committed to the vision as you are. And there's a really simple way to determine that, and that's whether or not they'll work for free. If they want money, they're probably not entrepreneurial. They probably don't have an owner mentality. They have an employee mentality. So with my most recent startup, I went out and identified the skill sets that I didn't have that I needed to get the idea off the ground. And I identified people that had those skill sets. And I approached them and met with them and interviewed them and talked to them. And what I was trying to find out was, are these people entrepreneurial? Have they tried to start businesses in the past but maybe weren't able to pull it off for whatever reason? Do they have that sort of ownership mentality? Are they willing to work for free for 6, 9, 12 months until the idea gets off the ground? And I found 3 other individuals who were willing to do that. And we were able to sort of, as a core team, get the idea to the point where we could raise our seed round of financing. So that is the key litmus test that I would look at.
all right, I think we're going to have to end it there. I think our time is up, guys. Thank you very much.